Jacob Singer is afraid. When he walks down the street, people are watching. When he comes home at night, people are waiting. Jacob Singer is running out of time. This fall, Adrian Lyne, the director of Fatal Attraction, brings us a disturbing new vision. Jacob's Ladder.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks 34 years since the release of one of my favorite horror films, Adrian Lyne's incredible Jacob's Ladder. And when I say incredible, I think it's a horror film that rises to that level. But it's the fact that he was able to make the movie at all, which is incredible. Because Bruce Joel Rubin, who also wrote Ghost, and he later wrote and directed a film in 1993 with Michael Keaton and Nicole Kidman called My Life. Bruce Joel Rubin's screenplay had already reached legendary status by about 1987 or 88. It had bounced around so many different people. It had gone through so many hands, and virtually without exception, everyone who read Bruce Joel Rubin's screenplay for Jacob's Ladder, which I believe he sent out in 1980, it could have been 81, everyone loved it, from Spielberg on down. Whether it was the big directors or big actors like Harrison Ford, everyone loved it, but everyone said the same thing. This can't be a movie. This is an amazing screenplay, a stupendous read. It's too bad there's no way to make a movie out of it. Funny that it's a screenplay, which is a blueprint for a movie, but this can't be a movie. I think Steven Spielberg's exact quote was, "This would really be something if there were any way to do it, but there isn't." Now, I don't think this project was ever going to be for Steven Spielberg anyway. It doesn't seem to have fit his sensibilities of that era, the kind of E.T. era Spielberg. But I honestly don't think that Spielberg would, I just don't think this is the kind of, maybe as producer, but I don't think Steven Spielberg could ever make Shutter Island. I'm still surprised that Scorsese did, but that's neither here nor there. Jacob's Ladder is the single best screenplay I've ever read. This one and Richard LaGravenese's The Fisher King, like 1 and 1A. They're so far and away superior to anything else that I have ever read in a class by themselves. In both instances, the fact that the movie is almost as good is an incredible achievement. There's that word again. But the fact that they were able to adapt something so beautiful, so perfect in this form of 120 pages, fade in, fade out, it's pretty damned impressive. So my first experience with Jacob's Ladder was not in a darkened theater when it opened. It was a film that I saw a lot of TV advertisements for before it was released. So sometime, presumably October, right around Halloween 1990, I was in 11th grade, and yeah, my life really fucking sucked. Everything was bad, and it really was bad. I'm not making that up. I'm not exaggerating. Things weren't quite as bad as I perceived, but they sucked. I wasn't getting along with my mother. I was failing almost every class. I acted like I didn't care. I was in therapy. I didn't give a shit. Your basic upper middle class white kid version of a terrible time. Yeah. Still sucked though. But I remember seeing ads for this film, and it reminded me of a movie I was already a fan of, because despite the fact that I was flunking almost every class and I appeared disaffected, sullen, withdrawn, social anxiety disorder, all of that alphabet soup shit, yeah, but I was already a cinephile. I was already somebody who was comfortable discussing the filmmaking masters of history and historical facts that the average person had never heard of. So at least I had that. At least I could discuss Sergei Eisenstein when I was failing every class in 11th grade. Whoop-de-damn-do. But when I saw the TV spots for Jacob's Ladder, it reminded me a little bit of John Frankenheimer's Seconds. Now, there's really not very much common ground between those two films. Seconds is pretty straightforward postmodern sci-fi. If we're just talking genre, Seconds is a science fiction film. I guess you could say there are some science fiction elements in Jacob's Ladder, but it's a horror film with psychological thriller elements, and it is a mindfuck. If mindfuck is a genre, this movie would fit very snugly within that one. But what got me thinking, this is like Seconds. Mild spoiler, there is a moment in this TV spot where Tim Robbins, Jacob's singer, is on a gurney. He is being wheeled into what looks like some kind of makeshift emergency room. And somebody says, "Where are you?" Or he says, "Where am I?" And they say, "You're dead." He says, "I'm alive." And then there's a voice that goes, "Dream on." Well, in the movie Seconds, there is a pivotal moment where Rock Hudson is on a gurney, and it ain't going to have a good end for Rock, most likely. And the imagery is close enough, although Seconds was shot by the extraordinary James Wong Howe, and he used a fisheye lens for certain important moments. That's not what's done in Seconds, and Seconds was shot in black and white. So there is a lot of differences, but there was something in that, the energy of that sequence, that told me I need to see this movie. Because I already considered myself, I told everyone I knew by the time I was 16, you've got to see this old movie called Seconds if you can. You won't believe what you're looking at. But I didn't catch Jacob's Ladder in its initial theatrical run, but I'll tell you something else. Here's a little personal history. There are moments, at least for me, but I feel like a lot of you will have something like this, or moments like these, where there are events that took place decades ago, if you get to be old enough where you can say the phrase decades ago and be cognizant of what that might mean because you're old enough. You could be 26 and talk about decades ago would be 2 decades ago. How much do you really remember when you're 6? I remember when Seconds opened. And I remember going to school, Massapequa High School, the Monday after it opened. So I guess it was November 5th, right? I didn't know that was the date, but historically, history tells us it opened on Friday, November 2nd. So I guess this was November 5th. Now the movie was somewhat of a box office hit. It should have been a bigger hit because it is the kind of film that gets people talking. Word of mouth was strong. I think it grossed twice its production cost, but I don't know that for sure. It turned a profit, that I'm comfortable saying. When I got to school on Monday, I was not thinking about Jacob's Ladder or I wish I had seen it. I read the newspaper. I knew it was playing at the Sunrise Mall. I would have had to walk over there. I didn't have a driver's license. A number of people in homeroom were talking about the movie. Words to the effect of, "Holy crap, I saw Jacob's Ladder on Friday night. Did any of you see it over the weekend?" I think 4 different people in homeroom saw the movie that weekend. 3 of them loved it. 1 of them thought it was disastrously bad. He said, "The only scene that I liked, there was an explosion and it was pretty well shot because I thought that the main character, it looked like the actor was in danger." Like that's what he liked about the movie. That there was a special effect that looked real enough where he said, "Oh, that's it? Yeah, I thought it was terrible." The other 3 people said, I don't know what movie you watched, words to that effect. They were riveted the whole way. And they were talking about it. Their faces were changing, like they were still feeling the effects of the movie. They weren't simply calmly reciting, "Oh, well, we saw a movie I saw with my boyfriend," or something like that. They were like, "You have to see this movie." And then as the day went on, people in other classes, unprompted, brought it up. Saw Jacob's Ladder. Anyone else? They had to talk about it. The film got to them to that extent. We're talking about 16 and 17-year-old kids here. We're not talking about professors at Columbia University debating quantum physics. And oh, by the way, holy shit, you've got to see this movie. I don't remember another time of that era where people were as excited to share that they had seen a movie as this one. So that's something that always stuck in my head. And my first time seeing Jacob's Ladder, oddly enough, was when I visited my dad's parents, good old APC of SCF and Co., my dear old dad, the biggest movie fan that I knew, and the biggest, sadly, Yankee fan, well, sadly today, Yankee fan I knew. But my father's father, Nathan Cohen, retired to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, after being in the bowling alley business and nightclub business for decades. And he had a couple of VCR players, and I went to a local Blockbuster with Grandpa, and one of the movies I rented was Marathon Man, the fantastic adaptation of William Goldman's bestseller, starring Dustin Hoffman, William Devane, Lord Laurence Olivier. The other movie that I rented was Jacob's Ladder, and I wasn't expecting to find Jacob's Ladder on the shelves, but I did. It was still a new release, but I grabbed it. Way to go, me. Now, I was pretty sure I was going to like Jacob's Ladder. From what I could gather, this is no internet. I'm just going off what I read, seeing Siskel and Ebert on TV, talking about it. Ebert was a fan. I was pretty sure I was going to like the movie, but I wasn't expecting what I got. There are horror films that terrify us with imagery of brutal murder or very scary villains, physically, cosmetically. Then there are horror movies that scare us because we can't get settled. We are nervous. We have a feeling of angst, a disquieting sensation that we can't put our finger on. That's Jacob's Ladder. There's no ghosts and goblins in this movie. There are images of what might be demons or maybe not. We don't know anything. And it adds to the horror. Because Tim Robbins is a really wonderful actor. People know him from Shawshank. He probably should have gotten the Best Actor nomination, no offense to Morgan, because Morgan has been deserving so many times. Morgan, I think he won supporting for $1 Million Baby with Clint. But this is Tim Robbins' finest performance. He does broader, more kind of heart-wrenching. The acting here, he's so committed to this part, to this role of Jacob Singer. And ironically, if we look at Shawshank, and it's a movie that I can certainly talk about as much as anyone else, it's the favorite movie or top 3 or top 5 or top 10 for so many people. I would say of movies released within the last 50 years after The Godfather, when you ask people to name their few favorite films, Shawshank gets named the most. Andy Dufresne is a good guy when we meet him. He's a good guy as shit starts to go wrong within the prison. He's a good guy at the end of the movie. There isn't necessarily that much growth. He believes in hope at the beginning of the film. The payoff shows that he never stopped, don't stop believing. One of the ways that Jacob's Ladder was promoted, because there were a bunch of different taglines, but the one that sticks out, the most terrifying thing about Jacob's nightmare is that he isn't dreaming. And man, if that doesn't sum this movie up. Jacob Singer, through him, we see a man who appears to be in a crisis that makes no sense. We meet him, he's in Vietnam, and a very young Ving Rhames is one of the people on his platoon. He's in Vietnam. We already get the idea that he really shouldn't be there. He's a professor. He's clearly very intelligent. What is he doing with a rifle in his hands? I don't know. I guess he got drafted? Something goes wrong. He takes a bayonet. It looks like a pretty serious wound. And then we leave the jungles. We wake up, and he's on a subway in New York City, and it's probably like 1972. The film jumps around through time to before the war, where he is married and has 3 children, I believe, one of whom is played by an unbilled and very young Macaulay Culkin. But the world, it appears to be 1972. Is this a flashback? And what are we doing here? It adds to the sense of dread and displacement. And there is a really sad moment where we're back in the 60s and we see it's written all over Tim Robbins' face. This is not correct. This is not the time. What am I doing here? Is this real? And Jacob hears the same voice that I heard and anyone who watched the TV spot heard. Dream on. A disembodied voice telling him and us, you're right. This is not the time. Well, now what? Where are we going? What am I doing? Jacob keeps having these terrifying visions. The movie opens with Bruce Joel Rubin, the writer, talked about this. And this is a book that you can find at the library. If you're interested in reading the screenplay for Jacob's Ladder, you don't have to go on eBay and buy a copy of the script. There is a screenplay book where you get Bruce Joel Rubin's original script and the story of how he wrote it and how the film went through so many hands for 7 years until Adrian Lyne, the only guy in Hollywood who figured out how to make this into a movie. Nobody else could do it. He figured it out. He had recently done Fatal Attraction. He was pretty high on the, as they say, high on the Hollywood Mount. Bruce Joel Rubin had a nightmare and woke up in a cold sweat. Cliche though that might be, we'll go with it. This is what he says. He had a nightmare that he was in the New York City subway. And it was very late at night. And every exit was locked. There wasn't any way for him to get out of Union Square at 2:30 in the morning, wherever he was. Columbus Circle, I don't know where he was. There wasn't any way for him to get out except if he wanted to risk jumping the tracks. Well, look, there's an exit over there. Maybe I'll just do that. So as Bruce Joel Rubin, presumably in his dream, went to go jump the tracks, here comes a train. He woke up in a cold sweat. That dream is what spurred him to write Jacob's Ladder, which opens with this. Yeah, the Vietnam sequence, he takes a bayonet to what appears to be, it could be the lungs, we don't know. He gets hit somewhere low. And then he wakes up on the train. And he sees some shit while he's on the train, and when he gets off the train, that cannot be. It can't be. And then he can't get out. Can't get out of the subway station. So those sequences starting the movie, give us this feeling of displacement, this sense that anything goes here. I don't know if we're supposed to trust anything or anyone. Are we even supposed to trust Jacob's perception? Because he appears to be having some kind of a breakdown, a mental breakdown, a psychotic break. We don't know. The film gathers incredible momentum as Jacob appears to be closing in on some form of truth as to what happened in Vietnam. Because he figures enough out to say, How did we get out of there? And what the fuck happened to us? Right before I got stabbed, something went wrong. What happened? Without the boogeyman, you start wondering, is this a story? Is this a horror of the mind story? Is this just pure psychological horror? Is anything real? Are we watching a dying man's last fleeting moments stretched out as though a month-long fever dream? I don't know. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. But it's the not knowing. It's the feeling of not being able to comprehend what we're seeing, and a continuing feeling that something much larger is at stake here. Something very big is happening. Now, Adrian Lyne took some chances because he cast two comedians. Well, one person who became a successful stand-up comedian in Lewis Black. I don't think that's because he wasn't very well known. But he cast Jason Alexander in a pretty important role. And if you didn't know that, holy shit, that's George from Seinfeld, he's very good. He shows an ability to turn off whatever funny he has and, still has. He plays the role in a very straightforward manner. It's terrific. There was the main reason why nobody could figure out how to do this is there are certain things that are terrifying on the page. There's certain ideas that Bruce Joel Rubin wrote that nobody could really, you can visualize it kind of, but how is this represented? What do we do? If I write, Jacob falls into the void. Okay, he falls into the void. How do you represent that cinematically? You can't. So yet another irony. Remember when we talked about the movie Misery, that both Robert Redford and Warren Beatty dropped out because they objected to a famous scene in the book that everybody wanted in the movie, which was going to be Kathy Bates, Annie Wilkes, was going to not just break Paul Sheldon's ankles, she was going to cut his bottom leg off at the ankles. That's how she was going to do it. Redford said, no thank you, I won't have that done to my character, I'm out of the project. Warren Beatty said, no thank you, I'm all set here, I'm just going to go make Bugsy, this is a terrible idea. James Caan said, fuck it, I'll do it, and then they ended up not doing it anyway. Well, this whole thing, this notion of the void, which it's pretty important in the screenplay that everybody loved, and everybody said, this can't be a movie. It was one of the reasons why this couldn't be a movie. So Adrian Lyne actually shot this sequence. He had pitched it to the studio executives when he said, I can do this. I can make this movie. Will you give me a chance? Yeah. You're the first person who ever came in here and said he could do it. Everybody else told us how great the script was. Hey, can we work with Bruce Joel Rubin? They shoot the scene. They end up not using it. Yeah, they didn't use it. They didn't cut off Paul Sheldon's ankles, lower leg, however you want to phrase it. It's so horrifying. They didn't end up cutting it off after all. There is no Jacob going into the void in the final cut of Jacob's Ladder. Someone else could have made the movie earlier if they had just gotten over the idea of, we can't really represent this one piece for sure. There's a lot of other stuff, maybe we could figure it out. So Jacob's Ladder is one of those movies that was liked at the time, unlike Angel Heart, which is a film that has certain parallels, life and death and who's who and what the fuck is going on, mindfuckery, all that. But whereas Angel Heart was a box office bomb and didn't really get particularly good reviews, and now when you look at the Rotten Tomatoes range on, you say, how could this movie have been a bomb? How could this not have gotten good reviews? Well, people picked it up late. Presumably there were a lot of hoity-toity film critics that look down on the fact that, hey, we thought we were getting Chinatown, we're getting The Exorcist. Well, that's one reason why the film is so damn good. Jacob's Ladder got more good reviews than bad. And if you look at some of the reviews of the time, and not just Roger Ebert, there were plenty of big critics, like David Anson of Newsweek, for example, who said, this is a must-see. This is a great horror film. If you like horror, you won't be disappointed. Now, I need to point out also, Macaulay Culkin, who was just in the news, he had an incredible Halloween costume. He kind of looks like the Cincinnati Bengals quarterback, Joe Burrow. There were people that thought that it was Macaulay Culkin playing quarterback, it's like joking around. So he was in the news with this incredible Joe Burrow impersonation on Halloween. Macaulay Culkin is a rare Hollywood success story of somebody who was an enormous child star, thanks to Home Alone, who seemed to go off the deep end, had a lot of personal problems, and he doesn't really work anymore, but he doesn't need to. But he appears to have gotten his life together. And when he was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame a year or so ago, and Catherine O'Hara was there, who played his mom in Home Alone. He's an inspiring figure, is what I'm saying. He is somebody who could have gone down the dark path and never returned, but somehow, there before the grace of God go Macaulay Culkin, he figured it out. Was he 44 now? He has a small role in Jacob's Ladder, and the studio was convinced that Home Alone was going to be a massive hit. They chose not to bill Macaulay Culkin. It's not a big role, but it's a critical role nevertheless. And him going unbilled is a little bit jarring. This isn't something that you would ever take note of unless you're a person like me watching a movie, that a critical supporting character is not in the credits. And it was a strategic move by the studio. And when you look at the success of Home Alone, I would say that it paid off, because Home Alone was released only a couple of weeks after Jacob's Ladder, and that had to go into the thinking. Nowadays, we would know all of the machinery because somebody would have leaked it to Twitter or other social media. I don't know who said what or who made the decision. It certainly wasn't Macaulay's people. They had nothing to do with it. We're not going to bill the kid. Maybe they paid him an extra $100,000 to not bill him. I don't know. But he is really good in this film. And even if he doesn't look like Tim Robbins, we believe the father-son bond. There is a beautiful moment with a bicycle and Tim Robbins. And Tim does, mild spoiler, his character does a lot of crying in this film. And Robbins cries like a real person crying. He does not cry like an actor using the method to think of something horrendous on command. I stand on business. This is Tim Robbins' best performance. Shawshank is obviously a better movie, but he does more with the role of Jacob Singer. He's given a great role, and he acts the hell out of it. So right now, Jacob's Ladder is streaming free on Amazon Prime. If you have an Amazon account, you can just tune in and you can watch the movie. You don't have to pay $3 or anything. And it's also on MGM+. The reason why I didn't talk about Jacob's Ladder, which is easily a top 10 favorite horror film for me during my Halloween horror month-long series, is because I knew that November 2nd was going to be its 34th anniversary, and I kind of wanted to wait for the anniversary, and then it would make more sense of me telling you the story. The conversations I had with all of the kids who saw it on its opening weekend, those chats don't feel like they happened 34 years ago. They feel more like 15 years ago. And that's what memory can do. And this is a movie about memory and false memory. I'll say no more. This is a fantastic horror film. If you have not seen it, this is on the short list of, you like horror, you haven't seen it, you must see this. Angel Heart is also on that short list. The original Candyman you've probably seen if you're a big fan of horror. But Jacob's Ladder, released on this day, 1990, directed by Adrian Lyne and starring Tim Robbins, Elizabeth Pena, a very strong Danny Aiello, and a whole host of wonderful supporting actors, including Jason Alexander and Ving Rhames. This has been episode 348 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.